The Grim Tale of Grace Macabre, Chapter 42. It was a glorious fall morning. Grace sat out on the patio behind the house that the runaways shared, eating breakfast and talking with Ari. The trees were afire with dazzling shades of red, yellow, and orange leaves. A breeze whispered through their boughs, and Grace could swear that she heard her name being called out in those breathy susurrations. She leaned back in her chair and nibbled on a large strawberry as she listened to Ari tell her why he and the rest of the group were so guarded. If the other kids in town knew that we were wealthy and owned the club, they'd always be asking for handouts and favors. And the adults in this town would try to take over and tell us what to do, even though they are struggling to run their own lives. Grace could listen to Ari speak for all eternity. She loved the sound of his voice, the conviction of his views. He had a way of seeing the world that was so diametrically opposed to how she had been taught. It fascinated her. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Ari had changed, much to her displeasure, into a black t-shirt and faded jeans. While she still found him irresistible, it was a far cry from the intoxicating view of him wearing only white sleep pants. "Do you really know of any adult who has their act together?" he asked. "Even if it looks that way, it's all an illusion. I mean, your mom is a successful businesswoman, yet her life is in shambles, Grace. Why should we let any adult try to tell us what to do when we know better than they do?" "Well, I guess we shouldn't," Grace said. Ari gave her an appreciative look. He smiled and said, "Exactly. See? You get it. We are different." "Elaborate for me," Grace said. Ari brushed aside a strand of hair from his face when a breeze blew across the yard. "Well, we are wealthy and we have no debt. We don't owe anyone anything. We are partners in a successful business, and we're free from the chains that everyone else in this town are bound with. Do you want to know what I find the most disturbing about these chains?" Grace took another bite of the strawberry, trying to keep herself in check. She didn't want to seem as if she were hanging on every single word that Ari spoke, even though she hungered for each syllable. "Sure," she said. "So far, I agree with everything you've said." Ari reached out and plucked the strawberry she had just bitten into from her hand. He leaned back and plopped the rest of it into his mouth. "So delicious," he said. He grabbed a napkin and blotted his lips. "The most disturbing thing about what I've just said is that they all chose to put these chains on themselves, Grace." Grace was amazed at the fact that he had eaten her strawberry. Since last night, he had stepped out of his quiet, brooding facade and was so much more open to her. And she saw the act of taking the strawberry she had just nibbled and eating it as an act of intimacy. Only couples who were completely comfortable and intimate with one another shared food in that way. The love in her heart for Ari grew suddenly intense. The passion was nearly overwhelming. "Are you okay?" he asked, seeing that her eyes had become glassy. Grace cleared her throat and took a sip of water. "Yes," she replied, embarrassed that she had nearly lost control of her emotions. "I just got part of the strawberry stuck in my throat and choking me a little." Ari looked at her as if he were not sure he believed her. He was about to say something when his cell phone buzzed. She caught a glance at the caller ID, noting that it said, "Father." He snatched up the phone. "Sorry, Grace," he said as he stood. "I need to take this. I'll be back in a minute." "I didn't know you had a father," she said, hoping to reconnect with the moment of intimacy. He gave her a look that seemed almost annoyed, which left her confused. He caught himself and flashed a wide smile. "Oh, don't we all have a father somewhere?" She considered his response and decided that he would eventually explain, so she let it go. As he walked away, she took in the expanse of the morning. Golden beams of light caused everything to glow in splendor. She closed her eyes and took in the bird song being carried along on the whispering breeze. She sat there in near complete serenity when someone startled her by whispering in her ear, "Grace?" She opened her eyes and looked around. There was no one there. Ari had walked over to the tree line of the forest that wrapped around the property. "Grace?" said the voice again. She started to push herself up from her chair when she realized that the second call came from in front of her. She looked down at the bowl of ruby red strawberries sitting in the center of the table. The voice called her name a third time, just a whisper, yet with urgency. "Grace." It was clear that it came from the strawberries. That's impossible, she thought. Then she remembered the dreams, the oikos badge and the feather, her own rotting corpse in the mirror, the strange word written on the wall, SEKANSEHTLLIK. "Oh no, it's happening again," she thought. Now that she remembered these supernatural occurrences, she couldn't believe that she had forgotten them. The strawberries whispered to her one final time. It was urgent, pleading. Then, each strawberry, a dozen in all, popped open, instantly transforming into iridescent dragonflies. Their bodies were vibrant red, their wings shimmered in so many hues of crimson that Grace had difficulty comprehending them all. That is when she realized that these dragonflies, like the strange and beautiful birds that had produced the feathers she kept in her purse, were not merely dragonflies. They resembled dragonflies, but were so much more. These dragonflies were something new, a new species, a new creation. They hovered directly in front of her face, their multifaceted eyes locked firmly on hers, innocent and pleading. The soft buzzing of their wings seemed to form words that she couldn't quite make out. Suddenly, they fluttered into action, swirled around her in a flurry, then flew away in all directions, leaving a faint iridescent glimmer in their wake that slowly evaporated. Grace was amazed and glanced at Ari to see if he had witnessed what had just occurred. He still had his back to her, the phone to his ear. She glanced back at the bowl that had held the strawberries. It was no longer a bowl. As she had watched the strawberry dragonflies, the bowl had transformed into a bouquet of the most exquisite flowers. The stems and leaves were pale green with indigo swirls, but the flowers themselves were the most amazing thing of all. They were tiny and delicate. The petals were purest white and contained what appeared to be the same ancient script that she had seen on the gnarled tree in her dream. The script was drawn in scarlet. Their fragrance wafted up to her and reminded her of cinnamon and honey. For a moment, Ari was forgotten, as was everything around her. The only thing that mattered was the intoxicating aroma of these elegant flowers. As she leaned in closer to the bouquet, the strawberry dragonflies returned and softly hummed around her head. She looked more closely at the flowers and was surprised to see that they were breathing. They were undeniably flowers, yet they were alive in a way that plants were not supposed to be. Suddenly, the flowers began to hum in harmony with the strawberry dragonflies. It grew in intensity for a long moment, beautiful and uplifting, filling her spirit with a sense of awe and, strangely, with peace. The humming became one word, repeated 7 times. The first 3, agape, 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 were softly whispered. The next 3 times grew louder and more intense, with the final word saying so boldly and powerfully, agape, that the flatware and silverware on the table rattled. Then the tiny, delicate flowers popped off their stems and flew among the dragonflies. They flitted and swirled, dipped and danced, and then, to Grace's delight, they flew away, high into the sky, until they disappeared.